All right, well, we will go ahead and get going with this. So, hi, I'm Ben. We are doing this is the resume workshop. Um, we are recording this, so heads up on that. If you have any questions that you don't want people to see that you're asking, you can type it in the chat, and that won't show up on the recording, but I'll still be sure to address it. So let's jump right in, and we're going to do a little bit of interaction here, a little bit of questions. And those of you who have heard me ask this before, you don't have to respond, but what is the overall goal of your application package? When you're applying, you're trying to get your resume in, what is your goal? What are you trying to do? And you can type it in the chat or you can unmute yourself either way. Didn't know he was going to ask questions. Jeez. Be seen and display your skill set. Okay. Any other thoughts? Sell it yourself. See a couple more people writing. We'll give it a second here. At least I think you're writing. Little dots are bouncing up and down. To secure a position. Good. Okay. Present your skills and who you are in the best light. Okay. So we have be seen and display yourself, sell yourself, secure a position, and present your skills and who you are in the best light. Those are all somewhat true. Those things do all happen. I would argue that the whole purpose of your application package is you want to demonstrate that you understand the company and their product. So that's the very first thing that you want to do is you're convincing them that you know who they are. So that other stuff comes around, yes. But the first thing you want to do is demonstrate that you actually understand who they are. Then you want to show that you want to be a part of them. So you're trying to convince them that you belong there. Related to that, you're trying to make it easy for them to picture you as part of their team. In the end, you're trying to make them feel that you should already be working there. So you do all those things that you mentioned earlier as part of this, but as far as the mentality that you want to take when you're starting to apply for a job, really change it from selling yourself to convincing them that you should already be there. It's a slightly different thought, but it changes your whole approach. So instead of selling yourself, where you're just trying to come up with all the things that you think are the best things that you need to talk about, when you're trying to convince them that you should already be there, that requires you to understand them. So it requires you to have a better understanding of what it is they're looking for, and then showing them, hey, I fit all this perfectly. Why don't you already have me here? Right? So how do you do that? The first thing you want to do is take a look at the job post or the company page is a good place to start, but really get into the job post. Start by analyzing a few of those. Not just one job post. If you're applying to a specific job, yes, that's a good way to go. If you're writing a general resume, then look at a couple general job posts so you can get an idea of the sort of things that you want to include. When you're looking at a job post, you can't always really go by the title. Sometimes they're generic. Sometimes they change the names between companies on what one job is. For example, if you look at some hospitals, they'll say they're looking for a clinical engineer, but if you go to the Veteran Affairs healthcare system, they're looking for clinical engineer or biomedical engineers. So sometimes they have different names for the same thing. So don't necessarily go by the title. Look more into the overview and the summary. And that'll give you an idea of what the job actually does. You then want to look into their responsibilities. So what are you going to be doing in that position? Your qualifications, what experiences are you supposed to have? Do you need to have? And then usually there's a little bit about the company. So there'll be some more information further down on that. What you're actually looking for when you're analyzing a job post is what they are really emphasizing. So they're going to say a lot of things that are trying to get you interested in working for the company, but they're also going to say a lot of things that are kind of key takeaways that are sometimes a little bit more hidden. So usually the first points they make are the most important. So when they're listing back on those responsibilities or the qualifications, the first things that they're listing are the ones they're really, really trying to emphasize. It's kind of the same thing that you're doing with your resume. You list the most important things first because that's what people glancing through look at first. So definitely pay attention to the order of which they are presenting their information. If the very first thing they're saying is that you need to know AutoCAD, and then further down, it's talking about your project management skills. If you come in knowing no AutoCAD, but knowing a lot of project management, it's going to be a harder job to get. Okay. Not saying it's impossible, just saying they're kind of ranking it by the way they present it. Look for the commonalities between the descriptions and the qualifications. Meaning if they repeat themselves a lot on the things that they're mentioning, then those are the things you really want to highlight. So go through, and when you're looking through the job description, mark those things that just kind of really stand out. They shouldn't. That'll be pretty obvious that they kind of repeat themselves on that. The overview and the about the company sections will tell you a lot about the values of the company, and the values are something that you still want to communicate. It's a company that is serving a particular, I don't want to say audience, but a particular patient group, or another target, then you want to identify with them. I'm not saying like fake it, but I am saying that it's worth mentioning if there's a particular group that they're interested in. Or if you are passionate about that group, then use that to your advantage, because that is something that you should be emphasizing. So take a look at those sections. Be sure you're familiar with them. If nothing else, when you get to the actual interview part, it'll help you to know what not to say or what to say. And then try to imagine how those professional skills that they're asking for would actually look in this position. So how would the position actually use good communication skills? Is that going to be mostly through email, or is it going to be mostly through leading meetings? So kind of try to picture what the job is actually going to be like, so you can describe the skills that you have done or the experiences that you have that are already meeting those skills. Does that make sense? And y'all, please jump in at any point if you have any questions or comments. This is an open dialogue. And I just threw my pencil across the room, so I'm going to grab that while y'all take a second to process. Okay, I don't see any hands, and doesn't look, I don't see any of the dots jumping up and down, so I don't think we're typing. So we'll move on. So now you've analyzed the job post some, take their exact keywords and phrases and use them. I mean, you're not trying to copy the job post verbatim, because that tends to be pretty obvious and it's frowned upon. But if they are using certain phrases over and over, use the same phrases. If there are certain words they use over and over, use those words. Part of the reason being is they will be looking for those. They're actually going to have their AI, their screening process, the program is going to be looking for certain keywords. So you want to be sure that you're including those. So anything that you see that they've used multiple times, be sure you include it. Anything that they're really emphasizing, be sure you include it. You want to highlight examples from your past that are demonstrating those things in your cover letters, your resume, your interview prep, anywhere else. So when they're saying they really, really emphasize those communication skills, and I'm just using that one because it's the first thing I can think of because we've already said it. If they're really saying they need those communication skills, then you need to come up with examples that show that you have those communication skills. So if you're in senior design and you have to talk about having meetings with your clients, that can be a good one. Or the presentation that you do at the end of the semester, where you get up and you talk about your entire project in front of the group or in front of a large group of people. If you've done summer research and you ended up doing a poster presentation, use those, draw upon those examples from your past to actually fit those skills. So you want to demonstrate, not just say that you have it. It's not enough just to say, I have communication skills. You have to demonstrate it. So gather those examples based on that. Do try to address every point that you identify. Try to address it between both the cover letter and the resume, but you kind of want the resume to be able to stand alone on it. So, and again, we're not making things up. That's not like if you are lacking a particular skill that you just say that you have it, but if you can talk to it, do so. Be ready to discuss examples and experiences that fit the posts. So anything that you say that you have, if you do say that you have communication skills, you need to be able to back it up. If they ask you, well, tell me about these communication skills of yours, you need to be able to jump in and say, well, yes, I have those based on this, this, and this. These are the things that I've done that demonstrate it, right? Um, and as I've said in the last one, you don't have to meet every requirement. When they give you that job posting, it really is kind of like their wish list of what they think the perfect employee is going to be. It's very rare that they actually find that person. So when they say they want the entry level position that has 5 years of experience, well, that's not an entry level position. That doesn't make any sense. But they're really kind of just giving their wish list there. And they're not going to find somebody with 5 years of experience looking for an entry level position. So it really is that kind of like they're putting everything out there. So you don't have to meet every single requirement that they say. I would meet those first ones for sure, saying if they want somebody to program in AutoCAD and you have no idea how to do that, I probably wouldn't apply for the job. Um, but as long as you're meeting most of them, and if there are certain minor ones that you're lacking, be ready to talk about what you're doing to get those skills, how you're going to improve those skills. So are you taking classes on the side? Are you trying to work on your own projects to develop those skills? So be ready to talk about them, or how you would want to see yourself develop those skills in the job, or how if those skills came up and were necessary at a time and you didn't have them, what would you do? How would you go about accomplishing the task even though you don't have those skills? Does that make sense? Does that not make sense? Are everybody good? Okay, see, this is the problem. All I've got is a bunch of letters to look at. There's the thumbs up. Thank you. And I got a good typed in. Awesome. Good, good. We'll keep going then. Okay, so what goes into your application packet? We're focusing pretty much just on resumes with this one, but there's several pieces that actually go into it. So your resume, it displays your qualification. The goal of the resume really is to get you to that interview. The resume is not going to get you a job. Your application packet is not going to get you a job. What you're trying to do is have it get you through the door to that interview process. It's the interview process combined with all these other experiences that gets you the job. So the resume is really just one piece. You have a cover letter. The cover letter, so the resume gives the details of your qualification. Your cover letter gives the summary of those qualifications. We'll talk about how your resume can also do it some, but really your cover letter is where you come back and you say, well, I've got 10 years experience doing this. Well, if I look at your resume, I can probably piece together those 10 years, but it's not always necessarily obvious, right? If I say that I have 10 years of project management skills, but I've only worked 3 years in a job at a time, if you add four of those jobs together, it makes 10 years, right? So that's what the cover letter is doing. It's summarizing, it's coming across your entire career. And it does that for not just your experiences, but also your interests, your passions, um, and so on. You also get a chance to explain bumps with your cover letter. So if you were out of work for a while, if you had to take care of a family member, anything along those lines, that's your chance to explain it and explain it away some. Um, you also want a list of references. We'll talk more about references later, but you want to be able to show people who will vouch for you. If you're putting together an entire packet, it's nice to have that list just already handy. A list of 3 to 5 references that you can call up and say, hey, these are the people that can vouch for me, right? It's also nice to have sample work. So if you're going into a job that would have a portfolio of previous things that you can show off, that would be great. So have some sample work ready to go. The one thing I can think of is for writers. So writers would have some of their best work that they can send in with a sample of the writing and say, look, this is what I'm capable of doing. For engineers, maybe that's more along the lines of a design that you created or a project that you had to tackle. So opportunities there. And emails are definitely a part of your application packet. I don't mean that you're going to write emails to have kind of in your back pocket to send out. I mean the emails that you use to contact the HR department or to arrange for any sort of interviews, emails that you send that are inquiries, any sort of communication that you have with that company is part of your application project, or sorry, part of your application packet. So these are your first impressions. they do definitely set the tone for everything else. So are you addressing them rather flippantly or kind of rude, or are you being really professional and paying attention to everything that you're putting into it? So definitely pay attention to your emails as part of your application packet. All right, let's move more on to the resume itself, since that's what we're here to talk about, and that's what you're most interested in probably for the career fairs. They're kind of a pain. They are a document of contradictions. Excuse me. You're supposed to be humble, but you're supposed to talk about all of your accomplishments. You want to brag, but you don't want to exaggerate, and you definitely don't want to make things up. Comes back to that being creative, but not making things up. And you want to be a team player, but you don't want to really claim from somebody else's work, something that somebody else has done. So it really is kind of this balancing act of promoting yourself while not overstepping the boundaries. And a lot of people can struggle with that. Um, Hopefully we'll cover some of how to make you feel better about that if that is one of the things you struggle with. But if we don't, please be sure you ask on it. So a couple of different resume formats. You have reverse chronological, which is where you're starting with your most current experiences and working your way backwards. So for me, I would start talking about my experience as an instructor right now. Then I would go to my previous job, and then my previous job before that, and kind of work backwards. Um, and you don't want to go back, if you have a career that's 40 years long and you switch jobs every 5 years, I probably wouldn't include every eight jobs that you've had. Maybe it's more like the last three or the jobs that you've had over the last 10 years, right? There's other ways that you can restrict that. That's probably not so much of a problem for you right now. Then there's the functional resume. And this one, you're addressing how your experiences meet the specific needs of that job. So this one's a lot more targeted. It's a lot more picking out specific things that they're asking for and saying, look, I meet this, this, and this with these experiences. And then there's the combination hybrid, which a lot of people tend to use. The general rule for the length of your resume is that if you have less than 5 years of experience, it's going to be 1 page. If you have more than 5 years, then it can be up to 2 pages, but no more than 2 pages. Going beyond 2 pages it's not going to get read. And it doesn't look very good because it means that you aren't up to date on current practices and resumes or professional or career applications. If they ask for a CV, that's something different. That's your curriculum vitae. That can go on for tens of pages and be okay. But for a resume, you want only 1 to 2 pages. And if you're with less than 5 years of experience, definitely 1 page. When you're writing, a couple of things that you definitely need to try to focus on. You want to be concise and be efficient. Concise meaning that you're using short language, using not even necessarily full sentences, but enough to get the gist across, enough to get that main idea across. And efficient means that you're doing it with not a ton of words. You're trying to make the use of the best use you can of the fewest words you can. And we'll look at a few examples of those a little bit later here. One of the greatest mistakes will say that I see in resumes is where people aren't very good at that being concise and being efficient. So they'll have entire paragraphs under their experiences. Really, you could probably reduce it to just 1 or 2 lines per point, and it makes it a lot more readable. You want to use strong language. That means your action verbs. So instead of saying, oh, I'm really bad at thinking of examples off the top of my head. We'll see those a little bit later too, but it's really where you lead with an action verb. So managed a group of 10 instead of helped to keep a group of 10 people online, right? I'm not doing a good job of explaining this, but we'll see that in a second here. You don't want to use I or we, so you don't need that first person. You want to make sure you're using the right tense. So things that you are currently doing should be present tense. Things that have occurred in the past that are done with should be past tense. So a job that is already completed and finished, everything that you're referring to in that should be past tense. If it's an ongoing position, again, back to the senior design example, you're talking about the project you're currently working on, then that's all present tense. Be consistent. And another one that we're going to come back to several times, be consistent in the way that you write things, the way you refer to things, the way you number, the way that you format. Consistency goes a long way. So make sure you're trying to be consistent. When I say use numbers, I'm not talking about numbering different items on the resume, like this is item one, item two. I mean, use as many numbers as you can to quantify your points. Um, so you're not just saying I'm good at going back to a writing example. I'm not good at writing, not just I'm not good at writing, but I have 10 published articles, right? Um, you're talking about coding. If you are coming up with a really complex code for something, given the number of lines of code that you use to do a really complex idea or something along those lines, right? So try to plug in numbers where you can so you can actually quantify it, not just saying that you're this kind of out in the air good thing that doesn't really have any evidence to it, but give numbers. And then be sure you are using the keywords that you looked for earlier. As we said, there's programs that will go search your resume for those keywords. You want to make sure that they are there. That way you're taken to the top of the application pile. So the anatomy of your resume. Um, oh, thank you, Stacy. Yes. So action verbs. Appreciate that. Action verbs list in the chat there for anyone who's interested. Your anatomy of your resume. The very first thing I would do is when you save it in a format that makes it really obvious who you are, who the person is who's doing the resume. Because if I'm receiving 200 resumes and they all just say resume, that's not useful. That's actually really hard for me to sort through, right? So be nice. Put your name. You can say resume and then put the date or something along this lines. It doesn't have to be exactly this, but something that is really easy for the employer to look at and say, oh, yep, that's that person's resume. This is what they were applying for. Sometimes you put the job in there. It's up to you, but make it an easy to read subject line for your or name for your file. You'll usually have your name and your contact information. You definitely want your name and contact information, not usually, sorry. A professional summary or objective, your education, your experience, some of your skills. What other sections could you think of that you might want to add in there? This is a group brainstorm on this one. So give me, let's go with 2 or 3 different sections that you might want to add to a resume that we don't already have up here. Courses taken, good. Community service and engagement, right on. Yep, volunteering, that can be good. Certifications, good. And honors, man, you guys are on top of it. Awesome. So yeah, all those sections for sure. So courses taken, usually you include those, especially with just the most relevant courses to whatever the job is that you're applying to. Or if there's things that kind of help to set you apart. So if I'm in the bioengineering degree, and that's the degree I have, then it's not necessarily obvious that I may have taken a course or two in JSOM on entrepreneurship. So I may want to highlight those courses, right? Or if I'm applying for a job that's more in electrical engineering, then I'm going to highlight the courses that I took as a bioengineer in the bioengineering curriculum where it stands out that I was doing those electrical engineering, right? So good there. Your community service and engagement, yeah, the volunteering experience can be really good. They want to see that you're well-rounded individuals. So including that volunteer experience is definitely a good idea. But not only that, you also get to show off some of the skills that you have through the volunteer experience. So your leadership, your organizational skills, having volunteer experience also shows that you are good at time management because you can balance these multiple commitments. The certifications, that is also good because you're showing that you are able to continue your education or go out and learn things beyond what we're given just in your degree. And then your honors and awards. So scholarships, if you were given awards for a particular project that you were working on, if you did do a poster competition and you received an award for that, most definitely want to include all those. So good job. I think the only other thing I had maybe is publications. So especially if you're looking into going into research, If you're thinking about going to get your PhD or a master's, then you probably want to include a list of any publications or posters that you were on. Um, but that tends to be a little bit more specific to the job that you're applying to. So yes, good. All right. Again, let's ask any questions. I feel like I'm going kind of quick. I should probably slow down a bit. Sorry. Ooh, associations. That is another good one. Good job on that. So, professional associations or even clubs that you are working with. So, clubs that you're doing or are part of as part as an undergraduate, that kind of falls under volunteering, but it can be a separate section. Professional associations shows that you are taking your profession seriously, shows that you have an vested interest in it because you're actually spending money to be a student member of an association, but shows that you're actually trying to get into it. So, that's a good one on associations. Okay, not seeing any questions. Well, let's keep going. So your name and your contact information. Key thing here that I would definitely emphasize, do not put it in a header. So if you're using Word, which is one of the easiest ones to build your resume in, do not make a header or a footer section on that. We'll cover that a bit more here later, but don't do it. So instead, just do it straight in the document. And in the same place, you can adjust the margins pretty easy. You can use narrow margins if you need to, or do your own custom fit to make it fit to where it would be in a header, but don't do it in a header. Include your city, state location. I don't like giving my exact address. That feels kind of creepy to me. But you can include your city and state. And part of the reason that you should do that is because the companies are curious, where are you actually based? Are they going to have to move you, or are you somewhere that's handy to them, somewhere that's closer to them? Include your phone number, your email address, LinkedIn profile, and if you have a portfolio, like a website, you can list that too. Regarding your phone number, make sure that you have a voicemail set up. So when you give a phone number out and you're starting to give out your resumes, giving out ways for them to contact you, you have to have something professional set up so that when you don't answer your phone and a company's calling, it doesn't just list off you have reached 555-5555. That's like one of the worst things for an employer because it's like, I'm not listening to this. I don't know if I actually called the right person or not. So instead, set up your voicemail, even if it's just that you're saying your name, that's enough, right? A little bit of a message can be good because it shows it more, that kind of more human approach. But have it set up and then listen to it. Make sure that it's current. Make sure that it sounds good. That you're intelligible, right? You're not mumbling like I frequently do, but that it sounds all right. So do that. Email address. Do you want to use your school email or should you use another email address? School? Okay, why the school address? More professional. Okay, get the association with the school. Why would you want to not necessarily use your school address? What could hurt you with using your school address? Make you look inexperienced. Okay. See a few more people typing, so let's give it a second here. You won't have to after graduation. True, very true. So once you graduate, I think you keep it for maybe a year at the most, maybe, but I don't even think it's that long. Um, so you don't really want to list your school address for that reason because then they can't contact you anymore, at least not the way that they did. Or you have to send out a lot of emails saying, please use this new email address. The other reason you might want to consider getting your own more professional sounding email address that you use for all professional communications from now on um, is because by associating yourself with the school, yes, you are showing that you are with this organization and it's an organization that has a good name, but you're also identifying yourself as a student. So we haven't talked about brand yet, but which the brand that you are doing, the brand that you are forming, how you are presenting yourself, how you want people to see you. Um, that's what a lot of the resume and your application comes down to is how do I want my potential employers to see me? Okay. Do I want them to see me as a student or do I want them to see me as a young professional entering the field? Okay. By associating myself with the school more and more, by saying that I am a student and by saying that my email address is through the school, um, then that really emphasizes the fact that I'm a student, right? The more I try to branch out and say, no, I am a professional, I'm a young professional entering the field, the more I present myself as that biomedical engineer, the better, right? Kind of think of it as how seriously are they going to take you, or at what level are they going to take you, right? So to me, I think really it's trying to set your brand, trying to set that impression that they think of you, giving them that impression, setting yourself up for that impression. um, you really try as hard as you can to make it that you are already in there, and you are. You've already taken classes in it. You already know a lot about being bioengineers, so don't be afraid to embrace it. So do embrace it, right? If you don't have a professional sounding email address outside of school, get one. I got really lucky. That is one of my actual email addresses. I probably shouldn't include it on something that I can put on YouTube like this, but whatever. Um, but I got lucky. I could find just my name like that. Try to avoid the ones that have like 6 numbers after it. Um, but do what you can. Sometimes you can use underscores or periods or things like that to help distinguish yourself. But get a professional sounding email address and then use it for all things professional. Make sure that you have a LinkedIn address, a LinkedIn profile. So, and don't just create a LinkedIn profile and leave it dirty or empty or kind of like half done. Make sure you at least put all your resume information on there. You have an opportunity on LinkedIn to adjust your the link that it gives you. It usually does try to give you something that has your name and a bunch of numbers on it. So go in and cut those numbers off. Try to make it as easy as you can. Something that would be easy to copy and paste onto a business card, right? If you can, and this doesn't always work with resumes, but try to hyperlink them. Make it easy for you for employers to contact you, right? There's pluses and minuses to that. We'll talk about hyperlinks here a little bit more, but when you can, including the hyperlinks can be a good thing. And that's true throughout your application materials. So if you're talking about publications, if you can hyperlink them, great. Okay. All right. I do like to make my name or the name a little bit bigger, make it easy for them to read. It's probably the only thing on your resume that you're going to try to over exaggerate a little bit. I mean, you're not going to like take up the entire top half of the paper with it, but make it easy so that when they're looking at it, they're like, ah, yeah, this is Ben. Okay. If you do some creative formatting, like the lines or anything like that, I think it's really good for your entire application package to use that consistently throughout the same thing. And this is just that kind of eye to detail that when you hand somebody an entire package with the cover letter, the resume, your references, and all that, they look at it and like, wow, this person's really put together, right? This is just one of those little pieces of details that makes you stand out. So if you decide to use something like this as a header, again, not an actual header, but to be the head of the document, use it consistently. Looks good. Okay. All right, the next piece that you'll typically have is going to be your professional summary or your objective. The objectives tend to focus more on you and what you want to do and what your career goals are. You don't see them that much anymore as far as the actual objectives. They kind of became a big thing there during the 90s for a while, and I think they're getting kind of outdated. Instead, I like to see a summary. So the summary is giving that overall impression of you. It's giving a summary of you. So we talked about how the cover letter gives that overall summary of your entire experience, of all your resume and everything like that. And then they go to the resume to actually look for the details that back up your cover letter. Your professional summary is a mini version of your cover letter. So for me, I have the trained leader of manager of team with 13 years of project management experience, 4 years of this, 4 years of that. I'm quantifying it, which is good. And it's the sort of thing that, again, each individual job, you wouldn't see this, but when I look across the entire resume as a whole, I can piece together all that experience and see how it fits. It doesn't always just have to be quantified or statements of what experience you have. It can also be talking about different passions that you have, or things that you want to highlight. So I do like the summary to use bullet points. I think if you use sentences, it tends to look longer. It tends to make it look more like that block of text that people don't like to read. So I like bullet points. They're concise. I wouldn't recommend any less than 3 bullet points anytime you use bullets. And that's throughout the resume. Anytime you have a bullet point, make sure you use at least 3. Otherwise, it just looks weak. I wouldn't go more than 5 or 6. Otherwise, it just looks like way too many. So 3 to 6 is about what you're looking for there. Be consistent also, not just on if you use periods or not, but on the types of bullets that you use. For example, here, I would actually say this was a little sloppy of me. I should have paid more attention to this. This bullet should be over here and lining up with these other 3 bullets. That's what you would look for on your resume. You want it to be consistent throughout. If you use a bullet here and a star or asterisk up here, unless there's a reason that you're trying to set that distinction apart, it should be the same, right? That's that consistency. Now, being consistent on periods, I typically don't use complete sentences when I'm doing bullet points, so I don't like to use periods. Whatever you do, do it consistently. And then do try to use those numbers and summarize. Okay. Any questions on the professional summary or objective? I keep throwing my pencil. Got to stop doing that. I need a fidget spinner. Okay. Let's see here. No questions, then we're going to move on. So the next part, especially for recent graduates, is usually your education. Now, I said that you don't really want to emphasize yourself as a student, and you don't. You're not trying to give off the impression that you're a student, but because you are a more recent graduate, they typically will want to see your degrees first, especially if there is a degree requirement on the job. So if they're requiring that you have a PhD, then you want to show that off immediately. If they're requiring that you have a master's, you want to show that off immediately. They're saying that you need to have a bachelor's in some sort of engineering field, that should come right up the top. So show those off, get it out of the way. Now, they do tend to become less important the further you go in your career. So it's not that you completely would wipe it off your resume, but you put it further down and emphasize other things instead. But for right now, I would put your education topmost. Still underneath your objectives, though, or your summary points. So if you have a GPA of about 3 or 3.5 or higher, could be a good thing to include. So mine right now is just pretty stripped. I don't have much on here aside from the degree and the year that it was earned. But if I had a really good GPA and was a more recent grad, I would probably put that on there. Usually after about 5 years after you graduate, you don't include your GPA anymore because, again, that becomes less important because now you have your job experiences to back up what you're saying. You don't need the GPA as much. On LinkedIn, when you list your school, be sure you link to it. So when I was putting University of Texas at Dallas, I would try to make sure that I'm linked through LinkedIn. I'm actually connected to the school so that they could see me when they go to the school. All right, what sort of unintentional information am I giving away here on my education? What am I communicating that I don't necessarily want to communicate? Age. Yeah, I'm telling you all my age here. Okay. You can make a lot of assumptions about when a person gets their bachelor degree. So 2004, usually people graduate, they're about 21, 22. So you can count based on that and figure out how old somebody is. It's not that that's always a bad thing, but sometimes it can open you up for age discrimination. So you'll also see a lot of people when they do get older, they just leave the age or the year completely off and just say the degree that they received. It can also work against you when you're first starting off in the employment field, because it can say that, hey, I'm really young or something like that. So that's just something to be aware of. You still want to probably include the year at this stage, but just kind of always think about what you're unintentionally communicating also. All right, so experience, work experience, professional experience. What's the difference between professional and non-professional experience? What sets aside professional experience? Pay. Yes, you get paid, right? That's what professional experience is, means you got paid for it. Okay. Being an expert, something completely different. But when you claim professional experience, it means you were paid for it. So if you weren't paid for all of the experiences that you're listing there, I wouldn't put necessarily professional experience, but it might be an area that you title experience. So if you're going to lump your volunteer experience or your experience as a student underneath that main field, maybe just call it experience instead. Okay. All right. So under experience, give your position title, and it can be a general title followed by a very specific title. So, for example, or the other way around. So, I was an academic program officer. Nobody has any idea what that means. And so instead, I list assistant department head beside it because most people have a pretty good concept of what that is. So, if you have a confusing title, you can explain it away. Um, the other thing that you might consider, and it's kind of a little bit more of a risky move, is you can just put assistant department head here and kind of reform the title a little bit, because that's, nah, you know what, strike that. You know, if you're watching this in the video, just erase those last 10 seconds. That wasn't good. But you don't want to put something else that may look like, that would make it look like you're trying to lie. So I would still put the real title and then follow it up with what the generic title would be. That's the same with a lab assistant. If you're volunteering in a lab, anything like that, there's a lot of different titles you can use for that. You want to pick the one that the employer is going to know. So you don't necessarily need to put that you were a lab assistant two or something like that. You can put that you're a researcher in a lab. Okay, so figure out the titles that would be most appropriate for that. Use that. Okay. And again, you can clarify as you need to. You want to put the company, the department that you were with. So for me, University of Texas at Dallas was my overarching employer, and I was here for since 2013. So I do have a big entry for UT Dallas, but underneath that, I list all my jobs separately. So the senior lecturer position, I have my academic program officer position. So I give the title, I have the department that I was in. It could be the lab that you're working in if you're working in a lab. You list how long you were there. You don't necessarily have to go for the exact day, but do get the month. Most employers are going to want the month to the month and year. And then where was it? So put your city and your state. Again, they don't need the exact address, but kind of that general location. Let's see. One other concept I want to enter in really quick before we move on is the idea of a master resume. I don't really care for the term master resume, but think of it as your big resume, your overall resume. This is where you store all of the experiences you've ever had. Okay. So when you think about it, you're supposed to tailor your resume to every job that you apply for. That can be very, very time consuming. If you have to rewrite your resume every time you apply for a job, you can imagine how long that takes. That's hours, right? Just for a single job. So instead, what you want to do is have this overarching resume, and it can be pages long. It can go on forever, basically. So for each job, you might have 20 bullet points describing all the things that you possibly could have done, all the experiences that you've ever had within that job. Then when you go in and you're building your resume to individualize it, to target it towards a company, out of those 20 bullet points that you listed, you only pick the 3 most relevant, right? So that's true for anything. So if I'm putting my summary up there, this part, my professional summary, if you look at my overall resume, my large resume, I've got 7 different summary points that I can choose from. Depending on the job I'm applying to, I'll pick the top 3. So your overall resume, your large resume, whatever you want to call it, master resume, it should be big, and you should take time to just kind of brain dump everything you can into it, and that'll just make your life a lot easier as you go applying to these jobs and as you try to go tailoring it to each one of these positions. Okay, that was just a quick point I wanted to make. We said that. Okay. When it comes to actually going in and listening to the details of the experience, it's not enough just to say that you were a lab assistant, right? You need to actually talk about what you did. So do not use the job description as the experience. Do not just copy and paste. That's really obvious when people do it, and it really doesn't help your case. So don't do that. Do use the job post for the keywords and phrases. Okay? Again, you're not going to copy word for word necessarily. You're not trying to plagiarize, but you do want to include all the main things that they're asking for so that it's findable, so it's easy to see. You want it to be a reflection of what you've done, and you want to make sure that those experiences match the post. So this is again where that larger resume comes in handy because you pick the best ones that fit it. Don't overload your bullets or sentences with too many thoughts. So this one kind of drives you crazy because you start reading a bullet point and you realize that they've got like four thoughts crammed into it. Again, this is one that I probably should have come up with an example earlier. Um, let's see. Nah, I can't do it off the spur of the moment. Sorry. Um, but you don't want to talk about how you're the leader of a team and how at the same time you're doing PCRs, but you're also training people and that you had to do presentations. All that should not be in one bullet point. You're talking about four different concepts there. So you should be breaking those out. Okay. So that's what I mean by not overloading your bullet or your sense of too many thoughts. So make sure those are separated out. Try to start every bullet with an action verb. Um, And thank you again, Stacy, for posting those in the link there. Show that a little bit more on the next slide. And go through multiple times, like several times, to cut out as many extra words as you can. So I have in order to there because you don't need to say in order, right? In order to means the exact same thing as to, right? So that's two extra words I don't need. Cut them out. Don't get rid of them. So every time you read through it, try to take more and more out. Take out the non-objective words and replace it with objective words. So instead of saying something that was very big or I did it quickly or anything like that, use objective words. So instead of very big, say 30 gallons or whatever the relevant measurement is. Instead of saying that it was very quick, say I was able to serve 15 customers in 10 minutes, right? Or I was able to type 67 words per minute or something. Quantify it, right? Quantify it as much as you can so that it's not those subjective words, you're going objective. And again, just to reemphasize, because it is really important, use those keywords. So again, this is a chunk from my resume. This is what I mean by using those action verbs to start with. So managed day-to-day office activities. Now in this one, I do cram a couple of thoughts in. So managed, supervised, drafted and managed a budget. I probably actually should have separated the drafted and managed the budget into a separate line. These two are directly related as far as the day-to-day office activities and supervising. But that could be a different one. Represented the Office of Graduate Studies and the Graduate Dean, created strategic interdepartmental collaborations to meet stakeholder needs. So these are all those strong action verbs that you're trying to start with. And this is kind of pushing it on the number of bullets I would have had. This is 6 bullets. So I shouldn't really have anything beyond that. Okay, so next point, skills. It's a skills section you can include. I've seen this being done a couple of ways now. So you can have a skills section in itself, or when you list an experience, you can put for each experience the skills that were used during it. So back here, when I'm saying to manage the day-to-day office activities, supervised, represented, created, managed, organized, I would probably have a separate line here or another bullet point that said skills, and then I would say all those different skills that were demonstrated throughout here. So the project management skills or management skills, leadership, communication, like you highlight the skills there. So that's one way to do it. The other is to have an actual skills section where you just dump all the different skills that you have. And this is kind of a brain dump. So you, again, on that overall resume that you put together, brain dump all the skills that might be possibly needed. And then when you tailor your job to the description, pick and choose the best ones, pick and choose the most relevant ones. I would recommend doing multiple columns on this one. That can be a potential issue later on, and we'll talk about that again. But multiple columns do make this a little nicer to look at, a little bit of a nicer organization. You can include sublists. So if you're talking about foreign languages that you have or spoken languages, it can be good to have. Okay, hang on. So does it matter how visually appealing the resume is or just cram content on there? Well, yeah. So visually appealing definitely matters. You want to have a balance with white space on your paper. Otherwise, if it's just like a sheet full of text, no one's going to read it. When you think about your resume and you think about how long somebody spends on it, the number I had heard in the past was about 7 seconds. Most people spend 7 seconds looking at a resume. So if you think about what I can skim in 7 seconds, you want to make that most relevant information pop. You want it to come off the paper and jump into my eyeball, right? If it's a wall of text or a page full of text, that's not going to happen. So you got to be more selective about what you put on that paper and really just highlight the really big stuff that matters the most to me, your employer, right? Not the stuff that matters most to you, but to me. Okay. How should it appear in a text file? We'll come to that here in a few minutes, but I'm glad you're asking that. So keep that train of thought. We'll come back to it. Okay. You can include the sublist. So programming languages, if you have several programming languages you want to highlight, foreign languages you want to highlight, anything along those lines, it is a great place to use some of those keywords. The one thing that I would say, and this one always makes me feel weird because it's just a bad reflection of society. If you have a name that you are worried that makes it sound that you might be foreign born, that you're not necessarily from the United States, or that English isn't your first language, it can be a good thing to list of all the languages that you know. If English is your native language, it can be beneficial for you to say that, or to say that you're fluent in English, or to call it out, right? So if you have a name that may sound more that you're not from the United States, or I don't even know how to say that right. That's not really what I mean. Um, just be careful. That's all I'm trying to say. That didn't work very well. Sorry, but I think you get the point. Don't judge me. Okay. Um, Now, more to your point that you were just making about the text file, how should it appear? So this is getting past the algorithms. Whatever you submit, your resume, the first thing it's going to do is go through an AI where it's going to sort out and spit out the resumes that aren't really meeting the keywords or aren't really good, and filter out and go for the good ones and pass those on to the hiring managers. So you want to make sure that your resume can go through that filtering system and work well. So whatever you create, it should be able to go through that plain text. It should be able to transfer it to that TXT file and not completely screw up all the formatting. That's why you can't use headers. That's why you can't use that header section is it can't read that. It doesn't convert well to a text file. Same with pictures. Pictures don't convert well to a text file. You're going to get errors when you do those sorts of things. And you'll get kicked out straight just because you had an error on your resume because it couldn't be read by the system. So after you write your resume, always put it into a text file and see how it looks. It doesn't necessarily matter that you lose all your formatting or that all the words kind of cram together because it's a machine that's going to be looking through those words. You just want to make sure the machine can look through, so there's no errors that are going to come up. The big problem with having that error on your header block is it scratches off your name. It won't show your name right. It's going to say that there was an error there instead. So now you've lost your identification with your resume. So no headers or footers, no pictures or graphics, no crazy formats or fonts. Your basic formatting is okay. It's just going to be stripped away. But if you go kind of crazy on it, it's not going to work well. Do you use your standard bullet points? If you use something that's a picture for a bullet instead, it's not going to work well. You must definitely do have to have those keywords. Typically speaking, when you submit a resume, you want to submit it as a PDF. Sometimes they will ask you to do it as a doc or a text, but usually a PDF is what you want to do. If nothing else, the idea with a PDF is that it's not easy for somebody else to come change. So it's kind of locked in when you give it to them. You don't have to worry about somebody manipulating it afterwards. Not that anybody would necessarily, but it's kind of that finality to it, right? So that's a big part for the algorithms. So you have to keep them in mind. There are programs that we have available to us through the ECS career website and through the university career website that you can actually submit your resume to it, and it'll link ahead of time and give you suggestions on how to make it more AI friendly or friendly for companies. I suggest doing that. I don't remember the names right now, but go look them up. Also related to this, though, I do suggest having 2 resumes. The one that you submit for going through the company, the one that you submit online and goes through the company, and the other one that you actually hand out to people. So you come in with this nice clean copy, you give it to the people who are interviewing you, you give it to the people at the career fair. It should look basically or almost exactly the same as the file that you're turning in online. But this is where you can include those hyperlinks and things like that that would have to be stripped away before the AI sees it. Does that make sense? So keep that in mind as you go. All right. So that's getting past the computers. For getting past the humans, um, keep your fonts relatively easy and relatively simple. So traditional fonts, you're going to use your Calibri, Arial, Times New Roman. There's a few other ones you can consider using, but just make sure it's a normal one and professional looking. I would not go below an 11-point font. Older people like me can't read it. The other thing to consider when you're choosing your font is how much space it takes up. So Arial, these are all the same size fonts. These are all, I think it was 18 point because it's on PowerPoint. But you can see that Arial overall looks kind of the tallest, but Times New Roman is the most stretched out. Calibri is the shortest and kind of the smallest. Um, it matters when you're trying to cram a lot of stuff onto that one piece of paper, right? Or if you're trying to fill in that piece of paper to make it look a little bit more full. The different fonts also do have different readabilities with it. So some are a little bit easier to read than others, but really it's just kind of play with it, see what works best for you. When you're turning in an actual paper resume, I do suggest using resume paper. It's a heavier weight. The thing that I like with it is if I'm picking up a piece of paper, right, picking up a piece of paper and I'm trying to hold it at a career fair, it's going to flop over like that. Okay, it's a pain in the butt. So the nice thing about resume paper is it'll stick up by itself because it's nice and firm. It's stiff, right? So that's the handy thing about resume paper. That's why when you're having a live interaction with somebody, you want to use the resume paper. Do use only the neutral colors, the white, the linen, the cream. Don't go crazy. Don't use like the pinks or the blues or anything like that. Um, it's not it's not something that we really do in engineering. Okay. That's not to say don't be an individual, be yourself. If you really like it, go for it. But it's just not something you commonly see. Do you need to balance your white space? So again, we mentioned that just sheet full of text, it's hard to read. It really kind of scares people off. So make sure you're including enough white space. Make it feel balanced. Make it feel inviting. I know it's weird to say, how is a document supposed to make me feel just by looking at it? But you can tell. So if you look at some examples of resumes online, you'll see the ones that look good just looking at the overall picture of it. So look at a couple of them online. Seriously, look up examples of resumes and take a look at them. See what looks good to you, what looks poor to you, and then do what looks good. Okay. Use formatting cues throughout. So what do I mean by formatting cues? Again, this comes back to highlighting what are the most important things that you need to communicate around to the employer. So for different headers, you can use bolding, you can use underlining, you can use things that make the entire section stand out. So that's your section header, right? Underneath that, you would put maybe your different companies that you list, and you have a particular format that you use for that each time. You're also going to put the most important thing that you want them to see at the top. So that's a formatting cue. You're listing that most important stuff because if I'm looking through, I've only got 7 seconds. The stuff that's at the very top for each job description is what I'm going to see. I'm not necessarily seeing the stuff at the bottom until I'm interested in spending more time on your resume. And then don't bother with references. Don't include them. Don't really even include that line that says references available upon request. Everybody knows that. So you don't even need to bother with it. It just takes up space. I'm just double checking my notes here really quick, make sure I got everything. Yeah. So this is my resume, or the last version of it that I made a little while ago. And this isn't to say that this is the best way to do it, because it's not. I'm sure there's plenty of things I should go in and change. But what I do want to show is when I'm talking about consistency, all the bullets are lined up. Yeah? All the section headers are lined up. They show the same way with the underlined and the bolding. All my employers here you can see are italicized, so it makes it really easy to know where were the jobs at. This is the sort of consistency you're going for, right? Everything is lined up here on the right side, nice and clean. I don't have it where it's ending part way over or anything like that. There is white space. This is still probably a little dense on the words, but it's not terrible. Yeah. So this is that overall view I'm talking about. And you have the consistent header. I'm sorry. You have the consistent header that's kind of going throughout. So I don't need to put all this information on the back of my resume, but I still have my name there. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the things that you check. I'm sorry, we're going to go a little bit over on time. If you have to bail, I completely understand. But I'm probably going to go closer to 5:30, so I do apologize for that. Some things that you want to check. So definitely checking that consistency. And that's consistency for various things. So not just the formatting consistency, or are you using your words consistently? Did you actually use your keywords? And for me, I really like going through each job post and saying, these are the different keywords I need to use. And then I'll go back and I will specifically look up each individual one and say, did I use it? How many times did I use it? Did I use it 2 or 3 times, or did I only use it once? Right? So going back and checking those, did you use actual action verbs? Are you using positive language? You don't really want to be negative on your resume, so try to make it as positive as you can. Writing out contractions, so it's in your cover letter more than anywhere else, but you don't want to use those contractions like don't. You actually want to write do not, because that's considered the more professional way to write. Do you use too much of the same word? There are certain words that we kind of latch onto and really like to use over and over again. The only one I can think of right now is the phrase "at the end of the day." So if you're writing it's more, that one comes across more in the actual interview process. So if you keep finding yourself saying "the end of the day," "at the end of the day," "at the end of the day," that's a little repetitive. It's the same idea with when you're writing. If you have a word that you really like, don't use it a lot. However, is one of those ones that can trip people up a lot when they're doing writing, or subsequently, or some of these other like segue words. So go back, take a look at it. Are you using one word too much? Yeah. Um, Excuse me. Do you interrupt a section? Um, so with that one, are you doing like a page turn? That's what I mean on are you interrupting a section? So flip back to this previous one. The academic program officer ends at the bottom of this page. That was very intentional, right? I didn't want it to have this single line up here at the end, or have 2 lines up here at the end for the academic program officer, or to start with this one, have a single bullet down here, then have the rest up here. You want to avoid that as much as you can. So sometimes you got to get creative with your formatting. Sometimes you got to be creative in how you space things. If it's absolutely impossible to avoid it, then you can do something like this, where I have the work-related experience continued. So you're queuing them in, but try to avoid that page turn in the middle of a section. Did you use the computer and the human spell check and grammar check? So you most definitely have to use spell check, at least the computer spell check and grammar check. Probably even run it through one of those. Oh, help me out. What are those programs called that's supposed to help with writing as you go? You can turn it in and it'll tell you the good ways and the bad ways that you did it. Grammarly is the only thing that pops to mind, but I don't think that's actually it. Doesn't matter. Okay. Thing is, check. Not just relying on the computer, but you also need to read through it yourself. There are certain words that are spelled right that are the wrong word. I do this a lot. So one of the easier examples is there, and there, right? So you have the there, that's the plural, the there, that's the location, and the there, that's the they are. If you use the wrong one of those, it stands out. Okay. Same with the yours, you are, or the you possessive. Other words like that. If you are not sure how to spell a word, if you've never really seen it other than heard it, and you try writing it and it comes across the wrong way, that's also one of those bad ones. So make sure that you know that you are spelling the right word. What's an example of that? The only example I can think of isn't the most appropriate one, and I apologize for this, but everything else is not coming to mind. The short phrase for refrigerator is fridge. Okay? You spell fridge Fridge. I used to have an administrative assistant who would write Frig. That word means something entirely different and inappropriate. So that's the sort of thing you're looking for. So if it's a word that you think you know how to spell, but you're not overly positive, double check. Make sure you're spelling the right word. Otherwise, it can lead to a lot of embarrassment. All right. Do you tell and show? So are you actually offering and supporting anything that you say? So if you say you're good at communication, if you're good at project management, Are you actually also showing them in addition to telling? Related to that, are you quantifying wherever possible? And then were you efficient and quick to get to the point? I know you're probably at this point thinking I'm not being very efficient, but that's okay. But be efficient. Make sure that you don't use extra words. Cut them out. Not to the detriment of your resume, not to the point where it's hard to read, but to the point where it's just a nice, clean read. So try to get rid of all those extra words that you don't need. Trim the fat. Okay. And then I say, is this your first, second, or third draft? Because if it's the third draft, it should probably be the fourth draft, really, before you turn it in. If it's your first draft and you're turning it in, then that's a bad idea. I can guarantee there's something wrong with it. Same with the second draft. So you should be a couple drafts in before you are comfortable enough to actually turn your resume in. So make sure that you are proofing it several times, because each time you look at it, you're going to find something different. And take time in between. Write it, come back in a couple hours, come back the next day. But give it some time before you get to the point where before you actually submit it, because you'll see new things. Now, yeah, there is a point you definitely have to hit submit, but have checked it a couple of times. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about some of the bullet points or how you actually write them. I don't have that many slides left, I promise. We're getting there. But let's talk about detailing information. And I want to thank Serena Tran because she helped me come up with these examples. So if I'm working as a physician assistant, I say diagnose and treat patients of all age. That's not very detailed, right? That doesn't really fit what we were talking about earlier with quantifying things. So if I say diagnose and treat patients of all age, including a 30% increase in pediatric patients since my hire date, now I'm quantifying it, right? Now I'm actually coming in and saying, these are some of the details of what I've done. So check on patients in the hospital. Again, that's kind of bland. Check on patients in the hospital, allowing the physician to see 8 more patients per day, resulting in a $4,500 increase in insurance. Sorry, I really didn't think people would call me. They never do. Muted. Okay. Assist with complex medical procedures. So again, you're expanding beyond that. So you're facilitating quicker procedure times and the ability to perform 20% more procedures than in the previous year. Condensing information. So going back to trimming that fat some. So here we say I started as a sales associate at Greenacre Plants, where I worked with a team of 50 associates. I was the top performing salesperson for 2 quarters. After 6 months, I was promoted to the sales manager and led a team of 12 associates. Our team ranked highest in sales for 3 months in a row, set a company record for sales in December 2018. I was like you guys probably tuned out like after the first 2 words, right? I mean, no one's going to sit through that. So instead, consider the bullet points. So Greenacre Plants, sales manager. Ranked highest earning salesperson on the team of 50 for 2 quarters. Easy to read. Put quantities in there, right? Promoted from sales associate to sales manager after 6 months with the company. You could relate this back to doing work in a lab. Went from data entry to running experiments in a certain amount of time, something along those lines, right? So you can figure out how you can do things like that. Led the team of 12 associates as the highest earning team for 3 months. When you think about this again, back to the lab, if you've trained people, I've trained 3 other people underneath me, things like that, right? Set the company record, yeah, okay. So if you want, you can bail at this time, totally. But I also have a resume here that we can take a look at and pick apart a bit. So in case that's not very easy to read, I'll copy this over, but I want you to take a look at this and let me know. Actually, let's do that. Do you have any questions first? Are dashes fine instead of bullets? Yes, dashes and bullets. I mean, I'm sure you look into it online, you're going to find something about the psychology of dashes versus bullets, and that dashes are negative because it looks like a minus sign. I don't know how much the psychology plays into it, but yeah, I think that is something that you actually would find. Saying dashes looks like a negative, or it's kind of a harsh, where bullets are nice and round. Do what you're good with. That is also worth saying. Almost everything that it comes down to on resumes and professional anything is kind of opinion based. I'm giving you a lot of my opinions here. Now, it's a well-informed opinion, and that's true for most of the how-to guides when it comes to writing a resume. it's based more on experience. And yes, we have a pretty good idea what employers or people like, but a lot of it really is your opinion on what's going to work best for you. So, any other questions before we jump over to this resume? Okay. Then you can still keep asking questions. That's fine. But take a few minutes, look at this resume, and write down three things that you see that you would want to do differently. At least three things. So let's give you a minute or two on that. I will sit quietly and try not to interrupt you. But yeah, take a look at it, see what you think. All right. What are y'all seeing here? Not consistent with the dates. Okay. So of July, there's a comma there. It's a little hard to see. I didn't realize I had the editing lines on here. Apologize. But yeah, um, good. Use action words. So here we have aid graduate students, obtain data, schedule, coordinate, operated, communicated, constructed, created, reaction time. This one's not very good on the action verbs. Okay. List general location for all experiences. We have that, but it's not very consistent. They forgot Richardson. Be more quantified. Okay. Can the UTD experiences be combined under one umbrella? So yeah, that's how I would do it. I would put UTD at the top and then list under each experience underneath it. Good. What else? What else are you catching? No date for the bachelor. Okay, so in this case, it says current. It's not lined up. I guess it is lined up with the Bachelor of Science. So current mean I would actually do if I was not yet graduated, I would put the year that I started and then dash and then either the estimated the year or or say something like current. The email has a typo in it. Yep, good catch. UT Dallas should have an A in it. It's still the school address, which isn't necessarily great. The familiar with power tools is vague and potentially irrelevant. It really does depend on the job we're applying to, but don't necessarily need to know that you can use a saw. So I would be worried about the phone number because there's an international code here, which is a little strange. So even if I was an international student, I think I would try to get a local phone number. What else do we see? Not enough quantification. Yeah, I would like to see more. Yeah. Any ideas on what you could quantify? So for here, for example, the aid graduate students in their research projects, so you can list the number, or you can say how many projects you're working on, right? Worked on 5 different research projects at a time or something like that. A few other key things here that I want to point out. Anytime you see the blue lines, try to figure out why they're there. So in this case, it's because there's an extra space here. That may seem like a minor thing, but it is one of those things that kind of interrupts it to the eye. So it's not just one of those not very consistent things. Another one I would point out is you look at here, you have this one word on down here on this bottom line. If you rewrote this to get rid of this one word, you could save yourself that space and potentially give yourself more room to write something else. Right. So it's kind of looking at what could I do to reduce this? What could I do to bring their arms up and make that a single line? So that's how you buy yourself more space when you need it. It's going through and looking for those little extra things that you could potentially reduce or use to give yourself more space. Something else that would drive me a bit nuts when I was looking at this is the spacing here. You have a big space between here and education and a big space between here and skills, but you don't have it between here and projects. I could spend a lot of time on this resume. We did make it up. It's fake, but we included plenty of things that I would improve on. So anything else you see? Is the resume we are currently looking at a good template for freshmen with limited to no experience? It's a good start, yes. Yeah, it's a good start. So I would try to do the things that we were saying. So quantify better. You can list your experience as a student yourself too. You don't necessarily just have to focus on things that have titles, but you being a student is something you can build experience on. Can you have columns? So columns are the sort of thing that do get lost when it comes to going through the computer. When it strips it down to a text file, columns tend to get messed up. So if you can figure out a way to do it, and that doesn't necessarily have to create columns, but can be in a table, the table also causes problems. So if it works in the text file, great. Yeah, if it works in the text file, that's fine then. The other one you can do is just be creative with your spacing, which is a pain in the butt, but it helps you to avoid the columns. But if you did a table and it worked well, fantastic. Yeah, go for it. Okay. Um, so there's more that we could go through on this one. And if you want, I'd recommend pausing it and looking at later and doing that. Go look at other people's resumes. One of the best ways to figure out what is a good resume is to look at other people's and see what you don't like about theirs, or to edit other people's. So it is a really good way to get experience for writing is picking apart other people's work. So offer to help each other, offer to help your classmates, look at each other's stuff, offer up suggestions. And when you do it, look at it through the eye of an employer. Look at it through the eye of somebody who only has 7 seconds for that first glance. So take a flash at your resume, see what stands out to you for those first 7 seconds, and what didn't stand out to you that you wanted to. Okay. All right. I think with that, the only other thing I have is register for the career fair if you haven't already. So it's coming up, not this Friday, but the following. We have 11 companies or groups coming to it. So be sure you're signed up and come meet some people. That's the QR for the sign up, not for anything to rate this. But yeah, there you go. Any final questions or anything before we wrap it up? Okay. Well, good deal. Well, thank you all for attending. Hopefully this was useful. Other than that, have a great Wednesday night. Go get some dinner.